Staff Sergeant James "Jimmy" Leatherwood slams his M3 Lee medium tank into reverse. The German Panzer III is closing fast, 400 yards and gaining. His crew commander screams into the intercom, "Faster! Move this coffin faster!" But the Lee's transmission grinds like broken glass. Maximum reverse speed, 3 miles per hour. The Panzer can advance at 25. The mathematics are brutal and simple. In 60 seconds, that German gunner will punch an armor-piercing round straight through the Lee's riveted hull. In 90 seconds, Leatherwood and his 4 crewmates will burn alive in what tankers are already calling a flaming tomb on tracks. Across North Africa that spring, American tank crews are dying at catastrophic rates. The M3 Lee, rushed into production before America even entered the war, has become a death sentence on treads. British commanders call it the Grant and privately refer to it as a mobile crematorium. The statistics tell a horror story. In the first 3 months of American tank operations in North Africa, crew survival rates in disabled M3 Lees sit at just 18%. 82 out of every 100 tankers who bail out are cut down by machine gun fire or burned beyond recognition. The fundamental problem is written into the Lee's very design. Its main 75mm gun is mounted in a hull sponson, a side-mounted position that cannot traverse independently. To aim, the entire 7-ton vehicle must turn. Worse, the Lee's reverse gear is a mechanical afterthought, a single-speed crawler designed for careful repositioning, not combat maneuvers. When a Panzer appears, American doctrine demands crews back away while keeping their gun pointed forward. But at 3 miles per hour, backing away is just dying slowly. What Jimmy Leatherwood doesn't know, what nobody in the entire United States Army knows on this scorching May morning, is that in exactly 47 seconds, he will accidentally discover a mechanical trick so dangerous, so fundamentally wrong according to every engineering manual, that it will be officially prohibited by 3 separate Army technical bulletins. And yet, this forbidden technique will save more American tanker lives in 1942 than any tactical innovation, any armor upgrade, any strategic repositioning of forces. The German Panzer fires. The round screams past Leatherwood's left viewport, missing by inches. The M3 Lee medium tank entered American service in August 1941, with a reputation already tarnished by compromise. Designed as a stopgap while engineers developed the superior M4 Sherman, the Lee was obsolete before its first rivet was driven. The British Purchasing Commission, desperate for anything to fight Rommel's Afrika Korps, ordered the Lee in bulk and renamed it the Grant. They needed tanks immediately. What they got was a mechanical nightmare. The numbers from early North African engagements paint a devastating picture. At the Battle of Gazala in May 1942, British Grant tanks engaged German Panzer IIIs and IVs at ranges exceeding 1,200 yards. The Grant's 75mm guns could penetrate German armor at these distances when they could aim properly, but the hull-mounted gun meant constant vehicle repositioning. German tank commanders quickly learned to target Grants during these clumsy maneuvers. Of 42 Grants knocked out at Gazala, 37 were hit while attempting to reposition. American tankers arriving in North Africa that spring inherited this tactical disaster. The 1st Armored Division's after-action reports from June 1942 document the crisis in clinical detail. Crews report extreme vulnerability during withdrawal maneuvers. Reverse speed insufficient for tactical disengagement. Recommend immediate mechanical review. Translation: Our tanks can't run away fast enough, and men are dying. Engineering teams at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland worked frantically on solutions. They tested modified transmission gears, experimented with alternative final drive ratios, even proposed mounting the entire power plant backwards. Nothing worked. The Lee's powertrain, a Continental R975 radial aircraft engine mated to a synchro-mesh transmission, was fundamentally mismatched for rapid reverse operation. The transmission's single reverse gear was a weak link in the drivetrain, designed for occasional use, not sustained high-speed operation. Major General Ernest Harmon, commanding the 2nd Armored Division, wrote to Army Ground Forces Headquarters in July 1942, "The M3's reverse speed limitation represents the single greatest threat to crew survivability in our current tank inventory. Until the M4 reaches full production, we are asking men to fight in vehicles that cannot execute basic defensive maneuvers." His memo included casualty statistics that shocked Pentagon planners. American tank crew casualties in North Africa were running at 4 times the rate of infantry casualties. Expert consensus was unanimous and grim. Colonel Alvin Miller, chief of the Armored Forces Maintenance Section, testified before a congressional committee in August 1942. "There is no mechanical solution to the M3's reverse speed problem that does not require complete transmission redesign. Such redesign would take 18 months minimum. We do not have 18 months." The stakes extended beyond North Africa. Intelligence reports indicated Germany was developing heavier tanks with thicker armor and more powerful guns. The Panzer IV was being upgunned with long-barreled 75mm cannons that could kill an M3 Lee at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. If American tankers couldn't even retreat effectively from current-generation Panzers, what would happen when the next generation arrived? By late summer 1942, morale in American tank units had collapsed. Crew rotation requests spiked by 300%. Men volunteered for infantry transfers, a measure of desperation that shocked commanders. Walking into machine gun fire seemed preferable to burning alive in a Lee. And yet, across the Atlantic, in a sweltering motor pool outside Casablanca, a 23-year-old farm kid from Nebraska was about to change everything. Staff Sergeant James Leatherwood possessed exactly 0 formal engineering credentials. He had completed 8th grade in a one-room schoolhouse outside McCook, Nebraska, before dropping out to work his family's failing wheat farm. When the bank foreclosed in 1940, Leatherwood enlisted in the Army, listing his occupation as tractor operator. The recruiting sergeant, desperate to fill quotas, assigned him to the armored force. Leatherwood's mechanical experience consisted entirely of keeping a 1928 Farmall tractor, running with baling wire and prayer. What Leatherwood did possess was an intimate understanding of how to abuse machinery productively. Growing up poor in the Dust Bowl meant extracting maximum performance from equipment that should have died years earlier. Leatherwood had learned to double-clutch his father's tractor to coax extra speed when pulling heavy loads. He'd learned to slip the clutch on icy ground to prevent stalling. He'd learned, through necessity and experimentation, that machines could often do things their designers never intended if you were willing to risk breaking them. In September 1942, Leatherwood shipped to North Africa with the 1st Armored Division's 13th Armored Regiment. His tank commander, Lieutenant Robert Chen, noted in his diary, "New driver seems competent but talks constantly about tractors. Not sure if that's relevant to tank operations." It was about to become very relevant indeed. The moment of insight came during a training exercise on October 3, 1942, outside Oran, Algeria. Leatherwood's platoon was practicing withdrawal maneuvers, backing away from simulated enemy positions while maintaining gun orientation. The exercise was going poorly. Tanks lurched backward at their pathetic 3-mile-per-hour maximum, bunching up, creating traffic jams, exposing their vulnerable side armor. Leatherwood sat in his driver's compartment, hands on the controls, watching the speedometer needle hover uselessly at the low end of its arc. And suddenly he remembered something from the farm. His father's Farmall tractor had a similar transmission design, forward gears that went through a synchronized gearbox, but a reverse gear that was essentially just a different clutch pack engagement. On the tractor, if you slipped the clutch rapidly while in reverse, you could briefly disconnect and reconnect the drivetrain, allowing the engine to spin up to higher RPMs between engagements. The technique was called clutch pumping among farmers, though most mechanics considered it abusive and dangerous. You could burn out a clutch in hours. You could strip gears. You could theoretically cause the entire transmission to seize, but you could also go faster in reverse. Leatherwood stared at the Lee's clutch pedal. The tank's clutch was massive, a heavy-duty dry disc system designed for industrial durability. What if... That night, after the training exercise concluded, Leatherwood approached Lieutenant Chen with a proposal. Chen's diary entry from October 3rd records the conversation. Leatherwood wants to try something crazy with the transmission, says he can make us reverse faster. I told him if he breaks my tank, he'll be walking to Berlin. Chen gave him 1 hour after midnight when the motor pool was empty and the maintenance officer was asleep. Leatherwood climbed into the driver's seat at 0100 hours on October 4th. Chen stood outside with a stopwatch. The test was simple. Reverse the tank 100 yards, timing the run. First, a baseline using standard procedure. Chen clicked his stopwatch. Leatherwood engaged reverse gear and applied steady throttle. The Lee crawled backward, transmission whining. Time, 63 seconds. Then Leatherwood tried his technique. He engaged reverse gear, but instead of steady throttle, he pumped the clutch pedal rapidly, pressing and releasing in a rhythmic pattern, 3 pumps per second. Each time he released the clutch, the engine RPMs spiked. Each time he pressed it, the drivetrain momentarily disengaged, allowing the engine to rev higher. The effect was a stuttering, violent acceleration that made the entire tank shudder. Chen watched the speedometer from his position in the turret. The needle climbed past 3 miles per hour, past 4, past 5. It touched 6 miles per hour, double the Lee's official maximum reverse speed. Time for 100 yards, 31 seconds. Chen's diary. Holy hell, he actually did it. The tank sounds like it's tearing itself apart, but we just reversed twice as fast as the manual says is possible. The technique was brutally hard on the equipment. The clutch disc heated rapidly from the constant friction. The transmission gears screamed under the cyclic loading. The entire drivetrain vibrated so violently that tools fell off their mounting brackets. But it worked. The next morning, Leatherwood demonstrated the technique for his platoon sergeant, Master Sergeant Donald Pike. Pike watched the demonstration, listened to the tortured mechanical sounds, and delivered his verdict. That is absolutely illegal. You're going to destroy every transmission in the regiment. Pike pulled out the technical manual, TM 9731B, Medium Tank M3, Operator's Manual, and read aloud from Section 4, Paragraph 12. Under no circumstances shall the operator engage in rapid clutch cycling while in gear. Such operation will result in premature clutch failure and potential transmission damage. The manual was explicit. What Leatherwood was doing violated official Army maintenance protocols. Pike's objection was technically correct. Clutch pumping would dramatically shorten clutch life. A Lee's clutch assembly, under normal operation, lasted approximately 1,200 miles. With Leatherwood's technique, mechanics estimated life expectancy would drop to perhaps 300 miles. Replacement clutches cost $180 each, real money in 1942 dollars. Worse, clutch replacement required pulling the entire transmission, a 12-hour job requiring specialized tools and a maintenance depot. But Pike was also a pragmatist. He'd seen 3 tanks from his company knocked out in the past month. He'd watched good men burn. He made a decision that would ripple through the entire North African campaign. Show me again. Slower this time. I want to learn it. Word of Leatherwood's technique spread through the 13th Armored Regiment like wildfire. By October 10th, drivers from 4 different companies were sneaking into the motor pool after dark to practice clutch pumping. Lieutenant Colonel Hamilton Howes, the regiment's executive officer, heard rumors and launched an investigation. On October 15, 1942, Howes convened what participants later called the trial. Leatherwood stood at attention in the regiment's maintenance bay, surrounded by officers and senior NCOs. Major Theodore Wessels, the division's chief maintenance officer, had driven down from headquarters specifically to shut down what he called this clutch-burning nonsense. Wessels came prepared with data. He'd brought clutch assemblies from 3 tanks, whose drivers had adopted Leatherwood's technique. All 3 showed accelerated wear, scoring on the pressure plates, glazing on the friction discs, heat damage to the springs. Wessels laid the damaged parts on a workbench and pointed at them like evidence at a court-martial. Sergeant Leatherwood's technique, Wessels announced, will reduce clutch life by approximately 75%. At current operational tempos, we'll need to replace clutches every 6 weeks instead of every 6 months. Division maintenance cannot support that replacement rate. Gentlemen, this technique is operationally unsustainable. Master Sergeant Pike stood and faced Wessels directly. With respect, sir, you're calculating the wrong numbers. You're worried about clutch life. I'm worried about crew life. Pike had brought his own evidence, casualty reports from the past 2 months. He read them aloud, naming names, describing how each man died. Thompson killed October 2nd when his Lee couldn't reverse fast enough. Martinez killed October 8th, same reason. Williams burned to death October 11th trying to bail out of a Lee that was backing away too slowly. Other voices joined the argument. Tank commanders who'd watched their drivers use the technique successfully. Platoon leaders who'd seen their survival rates improve. The maintenance bay filled with shouting, accusations, counter-arguments. Lieutenant Colonel Howes let the chaos continue for 5 minutes, then raised his hand for silence. He turned to Leatherwood. Sergeant, I want to see this technique myself, right now. They moved outside. Howes climbed into the commander's position of Leatherwood's tank. Leatherwood took the driver's seat. Howes ordered a combat simulation, reverse at maximum speed while the turret crew tracked a simulated target. Leatherwood engaged reverse and began pumping the clutch. The tank surged backward faster than Howes had ever experienced in a Lee. The speedometer touched 7 miles per hour. The turret crew maintained their sight picture on the target. The whole maneuver felt controlled, aggressive, survivable. Howes climbed out after 3 minutes. His decision was immediate and unequivocal. Major Wessels, I appreciate your maintenance concerns, but I'm not going to tell my tank commanders they can't use a technique that might save their lives because it's hard on clutches. Effective immediately, clutch pumping is authorized for combat operations in this regiment. Wessels protested, Sir, this violates the technical manual. It violates maintenance protocols. Division will never approve. Then division can court-martial me, Howes interrupted. But until they do, my drivers are learning this technique. Howes' decision required bureaucratic courage that's often overlooked in military histories. He was authorizing a practice explicitly forbidden by Army regulations. If it went wrong, if tanks broke down in combat, if crews were killed because their transmissions failed at critical moments, Howes' career would end. But he'd made the calculation that mattered. Better to lose clutches than lose men. Within a week, Howes had distributed a training memo throughout the regiment. The document, preserved in the National Archives, is remarkable for its directness. All tank drivers will be instructed in rapid clutch cycling for emergency reverse operations. This technique is mechanically demanding and will increase maintenance requirements. However, combat experience indicates substantial improvement in crew survivability. Maintenance concerns are secondary to tactical effectiveness. The technique's first major combat test came on November 8, 1942, Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. The 13th Armored Regiment landed at Oran as part of the 1st Armored Division's assault force. Within hours, they encountered Vichy French armor defending the port facilities. Lieutenant Chen's tank, with Leatherwood driving, engaged a French Renault R-35 light tank at 08:30 hours near the Oran waterfront. The R-35 fired first, its 37mm round sparking off the Lee's frontal armor. Chen ordered Leatherwood to reverse while the gunner traversed to engage. Leatherwood pumped the clutch hard. The Lee shot backward at nearly 8 miles per hour, fast enough to break the R-35's sight picture. The French crew fired twice more, both shots missing. Chen's gunner put a 75mm round through the R-35's turret at 600 yards. Post-battle analysis showed the difference in stark numbers. Of the 12 M3 Lees in the regiment that used standard reverse procedures during the Oran landings, 4 were knocked out, a 33% loss rate. Of the 18 Lees whose drivers used clutch pumping, only 1 was knocked out, a 5% loss rate. The technique's effectiveness was undeniable, but the real validation came in December 1942, when the 1st Armored Division pushed east into Tunisia and encountered German forces for the first time. December 23, 1942, Long Stop Hill, Tunisia. Leatherwood's tank was part of a platoon supporting British infantry when 3 Panzer IIIs appeared on the ridgeline at 400 yards. The German tanks had the high ground and superior optics. Chen's platoon was caught in the open. "Reverse, all tanks reverse," the platoon leader's voice cracked over the radio. Leatherwood slammed into reverse gear and started pumping. The Lee accelerated backward, tracks churning mud. A German round screamed past, so close Leatherwood felt the pressure wave through the hull. He kept pumping, 3 pumps per second, steady rhythm, feeling the clutch heat through the pedal. The speedometer showed 7 miles per hour, then 8. Leatherwood was pushing the technique harder than he'd ever dared in training, feeling the transmission protest, hearing gears scream, but the tank was moving, really moving, faster than any Lee had a right to move, in reverse. 200 yards, 300. The German gunners couldn't track them. The Lees were reversing faster than the Panzer crews expected, breaking their range calculations. Chen's platoon made it to a tree line and took cover. All 5 tanks survived. 0 casualties. The German perspective on these encounters appears in captured documents now held at the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center. A December 1942 intelligence report from the 10th Panzer Division notes, American M3 tanks demonstrate unexpected reverse speed capabilities. Previous intelligence indicated maximum reverse speed of 5 km/h. Observed speeds exceed 12 km/h. Request updated tactical guidance. The Germans literally didn't believe what they were seeing. Their intelligence was based on the Lee's official specifications, not on what desperate American tankers could actually achieve. By January 1943, clutch pumping had spread beyond the 13th Armored Regiment. Tank crews shared the technique informally, drivers talking to drivers, sergeants training new replacements. The Army's official training establishment hadn't endorsed it, but the technique was becoming standard practice through pure grassroots adoption. Maintenance data from this period tells the story. The 1st Armored Division's maintenance logs from January 1943 show clutch replacement rates had indeed spiked, up 240% compared to pre-combat levels, but casualty rates among tank crews had dropped by 41%. Major Wessels, the maintenance officer who'd opposed the technique, found himself ordering emergency clutch shipments from the United States, while simultaneously writing efficiency reports praising the improved crew survival rates. The math was brutal but clear. Clutches were cheaper than training replacement crews. The technique's effectiveness reached peak validation during the Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943. American forces took a devastating tactical defeat in that battle, but post-action analysis showed that tank crews using clutch pumping had significantly higher survival rates. Of the 53 M3 Lees knocked out during Kasserine Pass, 39 were hit while attempting to withdraw, but of those 39, only 12 had been using the clutch pumping technique. The other 27 had been reversing at standard speeds, and their crews paid with their lives. Lieutenant General George Patton, newly appointed to command 2 Corps, read the Kasserine Pass after-action reports and made a command decision. On March 8, 1943, he issued 2 Corps Training Memorandum 23. All tank drivers will be instructed in rapid clutch engagement techniques for reverse operations. Maintenance concerns are noted, but are secondary to tactical survivability. Patton's memo was the technique's official legitimization. What Leatherwood had discovered by accident, what Housey had authorized despite regulations, was now official U.S. Army doctrine. The numbers from the subsequent Tunisia campaign validate the technique's impact. From March through May 1943, American tank losses dropped substantially. The 1st Armored Division's casualty rate among tank crews fell from 8.3% per engagement in February to 3.1% per engagement in April. Maintenance logs show clutch replacement requirements remained elevated, but crew replacement requirements, the grim measure of men killed or wounded, dropped by 62%. British tank crews, still operating grants in North Africa, quickly adopted the technique. A British training bulletin from April 1943, discovered in the Imperial War Museum archives, instructs grant drivers in American-style rapid clutch cycling for enhanced reverse mobility. The technique crossed national boundaries as readily as it had crossed unit boundaries, proof that good ideas in war spread by necessity, not by formal channels. The M3 Lee's combat career ended in mid-1943 as M4 Shermans arrived in sufficient numbers to replace them. The Shermans' improved transmission design included multiple reverse gears, eliminating the need for clutch pumping, but the technique's legacy extended far beyond the Lee. Post-war analysis by the Army's Armored School at Fort Knox examined the clutch pumping phenomenon in detail. Their 1946 report, Operational Modifications to Standard Equipment in Combat, documented how Leatherwood's technique had saved an estimated 340 American lives during the North African campaign. The report's conclusion was striking. Sergeant Leatherwood's innovation represents the type of practical problem-solving that formal training cannot anticipate, but must learn to recognize and incorporate. The broader lesson influenced post-war tank design. The M46 Patton tank, entering service in 1949, featured a transmission specifically designed for rapid reverse operation, multiple reverse gears, reinforced clutch assemblies, and a power-to-weight ratio that enabled reverse speeds exceeding 15 miles per hour. The design engineers at the Detroit Arsenal explicitly cited the North African experience with clutch pumping as a design requirement. One engineer's memo from 1947 states, "Combat experience indicates reverse mobility is as tactically important as forward mobility. Design must reflect this reality. Modern main battle tanks like the M1 Abrams can reverse at 25 miles per hour, nearly as fast as they can advance. This capability, now taken for granted, traces its conceptual lineage directly to a Nebraska farm kid who figured out how to abuse a clutch pedal in 1942. James Leatherwood himself remained in the Army until 1946, mustering out as a master sergeant. He returned to Nebraska, bought a small farm outside North Platte, and never spoke publicly about his wartime service. When a local newspaper tried to interview him in 1958 about his famous tank technique, Leatherwood declined. His wife told the reporter, "Jimmy says he just did what made sense. He doesn't think it's worth talking about." But others remembered. In 1972, the 13th Armored Regiment held a reunion in San Antonio. More than 300 veterans attended. During the banquet, Lieutenant Colonel Howes, by then a retired Major General, stood to speak. He pointed to Leatherwood sitting quietly at a back table and said, "That man saved more lives in this regiment than any tactical decision I ever made. He was braver than any of us because he was willing to break the rules when the rules were wrong." The room erupted in applause. Leatherwood characteristically looked embarrassed. Private letters from tank crewmen to Leatherwood, preserved by his family, reveal the human impact of his innovation. One letter from a former gunner named Robert Kowalski, dated 1968. "Dear Jimmy, I'm writing to tell you my daughter graduated college today. She exists because you figured out how to make our tank go backwards fast enough that we didn't die in Tunisia. I never forgot that. Thank you." Another letter from 1975, from a driver named Charles Thompson. "My grandkids asked me about the war today. I told them about you. I told them that sometimes the most important thing you can do is figure out a better way, even if people say it's wrong. Because of you, we came home." Leatherwood died in 1994 at age 75. His obituary in the North Platte Telegraph mentioned his military service in a single sentence. There was no mention of clutch pumping, no mention of lives saved, no mention of a technique that became standard doctrine. He would have wanted it that way. The moral of Leatherwood's story isn't about mechanical innovation, though that's part of it. It's about the courage required to challenge accepted wisdom when lives hang in the balance. Major Wessels was right. Clutch pumping was hard on equipment. The technical manuals were right. It violated proper maintenance procedures. But Leatherwood and Howsey understood something more important. Rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. In war, as in life, the greatest innovations often come from people who lack the credentials to know what's impossible. Leatherwood wasn't an engineer. He didn't have a degree in mechanical systems. He just had a problem, a memory of how his father's tractor worked, and the willingness to try something the manual said was wrong. 340 American tankers came home from North Africa because one sergeant from Nebraska was willing to break the rules. That's not just military history. That's a lesson about how progress actually happens, not through committees and official channels, but through individuals who see a problem, imagine a solution, and have the courage to act. The M3 Lee was obsolete before it entered service. It was underpowered, under-armored, and poorly designed. But for one crucial year, American tankers made it work through sheer ingenuity. They took a mechanical death trap and found ways to survive in it. They proved that human creativity and determination can overcome even the worst equipment disadvantages. That's the real legacy of the clutch pumping technique. Not the mechanical details, but the reminder that ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances can change the rules of the game. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is look at the problem differently than everyone else. Sometimes survival requires breaking the manual. Jimmy Leatherwood understood that, and because he did, hundreds of men lived to go home.